Hey everyone, it's me Josh, welcome to Story Time. Right now we're going to be reading Little Miss Contrary by Roger Hargreaves from the Little Miss Library of Books. Here we go, another great story on the way. Get comfortable, get ready wherever you are, because we're about to delve into Story Time. Alright, nice. Let's see what we can take out of Little Miss Contrary today. Little Miss Contrary always did the opposite of what you think she would do. For instance, if you asked her to switch on the television, she would switch on the light. For example, if you asked her the time, she would tell you the date. And she always said the opposite of what she really meant. Mind you, it wasn't exactly her fault. It was probably because she lived in a place called Muddle Land, where everything is so mixed up and muddled you don't know where you're coming or going. Or going or coming, as they say in Muddle Land. So you can go up or down, it says there on the signs. You turn left to go up, right to go down. Oh, interesting. It's a very strange place indeed. The worms don't live in holes in Muddle Land, they live in trees. And the birds live in holes. And if you want a loaf of bread, you don't go to the baker's, you go to the butcher's. The baker sells bananas. Oh, wow. One morning, Little Miss Contrary was having breakfast. Roast beef and Yorkshire pudding. There was a knock at the door. Little Miss Contrary didn't hear it at first because it was more of a tap than a knock. Tap, tap, tap. But she did hear it eventually, and she went to see who it was. And who's at the door? She opened the door. "Hello," said a little voice. Little Miss Contrary looked down and down again, and there stood Mr. Small. He raised his hat. "Hello," he said again. "Goodbye," smiled Little Miss Contrary. Mr. Small looked puzzled, as well he might. "I wonder if you can help me," he asked. Little Miss Contrary smiled. "Of course I can't," she said. "Oh dear," said Mr. Small, "you see I'm lost." "Well," she said, "nice to meet you, Mr. Lost." "No, no," said Mr. Small, "I'm trying to find somebody called Little Miss Contrary." "That's you," laughed Little Miss Contrary. "I have a letter for her," said Mr. Small. "Oh, bad," she said. "I don't get any telephone calls." "I think I'll go," said the confused Mr. Small. "Goodbye." "Hello," said Little Miss Contrary and shut the door. Mr. Small went home, shaking his head. The letter was from Mr. Happy, inviting Little Miss Contrary to his birthday party. Mr. Happy had never met Little Miss Contrary, but he had heard about her and thought it would be nice to have her to his party. The invitation was for 3 o'clock on Tuesday, March 14th. At 2 o'clock, on Monday, March 13th, Little Miss Contrary knocked on Mr. Happy's door. "Happy Christmas," said Little Miss Contrary and thrust a parcel into Mr. Happy's hands. Mr. Happy was puzzled. "Who are you?" he asked. "I'm Little Miss Sunshine," replied Little Miss Contrary. "No, you're not," said Mr. Happy. "I know Little Miss Sunshine, and she's not a bit like you." Well, Little Miss Contrary is an interesting character. Then he stopped and thought. "Oh," he smiled, "I know who you really are. You're Little Miss Contrary, aren't you? I've heard that you always say and do the opposite of what you mean." And Miss Happy's like, funny. "You better come in," said Mr. Happy. "No, thank you," smiled Little Miss Contrary. Mr. Happy led her into his living room. "What a horrible room," she said. Mr. Happy grinned. He was beginning to realize that everything he had heard about Little Miss Contrary was true. "Would you like a cup of tea?" he asked. "I can't think of anything I'd like less," she said. she said. Mr. Happy grinned again and went to put the kettle on. After his tea, Mr. Happy took a Little Miss Contrary to meet some of his friends. He had to explain to them all that she was saying was the exact opposite of what she really meant. "Are you thin?" she said to Mr. Greedy. Mr. Greedy's not very thin at all. "You have very short arms," she said to Mr. Tickle. And we all know that he has extraordinarily long arms, actually, right? Yeah. "I like your beard," she said to Mr. Fussy. His little 5 strains of beard there. Well, she said eventually, thank you for the most perfect afternoon. Now I must go home before it gets light. Perfect, asked Mr. Happy. Perfectly dreadful, she agreed. And off she went. I say, chuckled Mr. Greedy to Mr. Happy. You do know some funny people. You can say that again, laughed Mr. Happy. You do know some funny people, said Mr. Greedy. Mr. Happy grinned and went home. At home, Mr. Happy remembered the parcel that little Miss Contrary had given him. Must be a birthday present, he said, and he hurried to where he'd left the parcel and unwrapped it. Inside was indeed a present and a card. He opened the birthday card first. Inside it said, many miserable returns of the day. And would you like to know what the present was? A pair of socks. Well, not quite a pair. One sock was white, the other sock was black. And as little Miss Contrary would say, that is the beginning of the story. Which obviously means it's the end of the story, yeah. Alright, well that's little Miss Contrary done. I have time for one story. Alright, all done and done. But I'll be back again with another story very soon. We've got a few more to go from the Little Miss library. And then we're going into some Dr. Seuss books after that. And they'll be done in part 1 and part 2, because they're a bit longer. Alrighty, well, bye for now, but definitely not forever. If you like this channel, please subscribe, click that bell below, and I'll be back with another story very, very soon. I'm Josh, and this is Storytime. See ya.